All right, today's lesson is on comparing and ordering, and we're looking at comparing and ordering fractions, decimals, and percents. So first we're going to look at how to compare and order fractions, and these are the steps that you will use to compare and order two or more fractions. And it is on page 130 on your book, so you always can go back and reference it if you forget the steps. Or you could take a picture so that you know exactly where it is in your photos. So when you want to compare and order fractions, you're going to first find the least common denominator of the fractions. We will talk more about that when I show you some examples. And that is finding the least common multiple of the denominators. The smallest number that they both go into. Then you write equivalent fraction for each fraction using that least common denominator. And then you compare the numerators to see which one is bigger. So we're going to be using these things called inequalities. And that means when you fill in the greater than, less than, or the equal sign. And remember that the mouth of the sign, so if you look at this one, which is less than, you want the mouth to open up to the bigger one. So like if I had 5 and 6, I know that 6 is bigger, so my mouth would have to open up to the 6. I think about it as the Pac-Man wants the bigger meal or the alligator wants the bigger meal. Okay, so let's look at this example. We have 5/8 and we have 7/12. Usually I like to look at them and see, is any of them bigger than a half or not bigger than a half? And they both are. So we need to figure out which one is the bigger one. And to do that, we're going to look at that first step again. It says find the least common denominator, the least common multiple of the denominators. So let's look at our denominators. We have an 8 and we have a 12. So we want to find out what is the least common multiple of those two numbers. So first I'm going to start by looking at the 8s. And if I count by 8, I know it goes 8, and I can use my multiplication chart for this too. And then 16, and then 24, and 32, and 40. I'm going to stop there and see if that's enough. All right, then I'm going to do my 12s. 12, 24, 36, 48. Do you notice a number that they both have as a multiple? I notice that they both have a 24. So we are going to make equivalent fractions with the denominator of 24. We're going to turn them both into 24ths so that we can compare them better. If I want to get from 12 to 24, I need to multiply by 2. And remember, you have to do the same thing to the top of the fraction. 7 times 2 is 14. Now I'm going to look over on this side. To get from 8 to 24, let's see, I'll count my 8, 16, 24. That's a times 3. And I'll do the same thing to the top. 5 times 3 is 15. So if I look at my numerators, I have a 15 and I have a 14. And I know that 15 is bigger than 14. So this one on the left is greater than the one on the right. Let's look at some more examples. These are got it problems in your book on page 130. So if you want to try along with me, I highly encourage you to do that. Pause the video if you ever need to. All right, so in the example A, we have 2/3 and we have 4/9. So I'm going to start by thinking about the multiples of 3. 3, 6, 9. Oh, 9, that's the same as my other denominator. So I'm going to change this one on the left to turn into ninths. And then I can compare them because they'll have the same denominator. To get from 3 to 9, I need to multiply this by 3. So I'll have to do the same thing to the top. 2 times 3 is 6. So on the left, I have 6 ninths, and on the right, I have 4 ninths. And I know that 6 is bigger than 4, so this one is going to be greater. All right, let's do the next one, B. We have the number 12 and the number 8 again. Well, I remember from the last example, that the least common denominator of those two numbers was 24. So I know right now that I can change them to 24. To get from 12 to 24, I'm doubling or multiplying by 2. So I need to multiply by 2 in the top and the bottom. And 5 times 2 is 10. To get from 8 to 24, I count 8, 16, 24. That's times 3 on the top and the bottom. And 7 times 3 is 21. Well, 21 is a lot bigger than 10, so I know that 21 is greater. You also might have been able to solve this one earlier because you might notice that 5/12, the number 5/12, that's less than 1/2. Half of 12 would be 6. 7/12 is more than 1/2. So that's another trick that you can use other than finding the least common denominator. All right, let's look at this last one. 1/6. So I'm going to start by listing the multiples of 6. So 6, 12, 18. Oh, 18. That's the same as my other denominator. So I'm going to change this one on the left to turn into 18ths. Well, I counted 1, 2, 3 6s. So that's going to be a times 3. And I need to do the same thing to the top. 1 times 3 is 3. Okay, now I have 3 over 18 and I have 5 over 18. And 5 is bigger than 3. So the 5/18 is greater than the 3/18. You might see some examples where you have to compare more than 2 of them and you need to put them in order. So let's look at this example where we have 1/2 and 9/14 and 3/4 and 5/7. So we have a lot of them. And we need to look at these denominators on the bottom and find a number that we can put them all into. So this is where you're probably going to want to use your multiplication chart. So we want to find a number that 2, 14, 4, and 7 all go into. Okay, so here's our 2 column. Those are the multiples of 2. And the multiples of 14 are down here. And the multiples of 4. And the multiples of 7. So we want to look through those and see if we can find a number that those all can change into. And immediately my mind starts thinking, well, what about 14? Because that's the biggest one. Can I make them all into 14? And I can't, because if I look at my 4 column, there is no 14. So I want to look at my 14s and see if there's a bigger number. So I go 14. How about 28? 28 would be the next one. Does the 2 column have a 28? Yes, it does. The 4 column has a 28, and the 7 column has a 28. So I'm going to make all the denominators be 28. I'm kind of running out of room here. Let's see. I'll go up here. And change them all to 28. Okay, so I'm going to start with my 1/2. Well, I know that 1/2 of 28 is 14. All right, then I have my 9/14. Well, if I look at my 14 column here, 14 times 2 is 28. So I know that I need to multiply the top and the bottom by 2. And 9 times 2 is 18. Okay, now 4 times what makes 28? So I'm going to look at my 4's column, and here's my 28. And it goes with 7. So I need to multiply by 7. 3 times 7 is 21. And then the last one, I'm going to look at my 7 column. And I know to get to 28, it's a times 4. So I'm going to multiply by 4. And 5 times 4 is 20. So now they all have a 28 on the bottom, so I can compare them more easily. The smallest number that I have on top is 14. So I know that 14 28ths is going to be the smallest one. Then I see an 18, which would be the next smallest. And then a 20 on top. And lastly, a 21 on top. So this would be the order of them from least to greatest. Okay, and that problem was a little bit trickier. It is easier when there's just 2 that you need to find the common denominator with. So this one, you might want to pull out that multiplication chart and really look for numbers and what to multiply by. All right, sometimes you won't be just comparing fractions, though. Sometimes you'll be comparing fractions, decimals, percents to each other. So here's an example where we want to turn 3/4 into 7/10. Okay, so let's look at what the steps are. It says change all the numbers to one of the following. So we can change the numbers to fractions, or we can change the numbers to decimals, or we can change the numbers to percents. We get to kind of choose what we want to do. All right, so in this example, we're looking at which one is bigger. And we want to compare 3/4 to 7/10. So we have a couple choices of what we can do. We can turn them into decimals, or we can turn them into fractions. So let's think. So for this one, I would probably try to put them both as decimals, but you could definitely turn them into fractions if you wanted. 3/4. I know that I need to make a denominator of tenths or hundredths. I can't turn 4 into tenths, so I'm going to turn it into hundredths. Okay, remember that it's 4 quarters, so it's times 25. And I'll do the same thing on the top. And I'll get 75 hundredths. Okay, well, we got 75 hundredths over there. And on the other side, we have 7/10. So I'm going to write this as a decimal. Remember that you can put a 0 on the end of a decimal and it doesn't change the value. So I'm going to put a 0 on the end of it just to make it look more clear. Now it should be easy to compare. I have 75 hundredths and I have 70 hundredths. And I know that 75 is bigger than 70. So this one is going to be bigger. And I want my mouth to open up to the bigger one. Now 75 hundredths and 3/4, the fraction, is one that we eventually just want to memorize. So I would like you to take a screenshot of this picture right now. And it's just some easy decimals that I want you to be able to reference. So if you see 1/8, you will know automatically that it's 125 hundredths. So this table should help you just kind of tell you some of those fractions. Let's look at this last one. Lucita made 85% of her free throws. Henry made 7/8 of his free throws. So that's in basketball, shooting free throws. Who has the better average? So in this example, I'm going to make them both into decimals. You can do other strategies. You can make them into fractions. You can make them into percents. But that's what I'm going to do. So 85%, I know that's the same thing as 85 hundredths because percents are always out of 100. And for 7/8, I'm going to go back to that table, and I see 7/8 right here is 875 thousandths. Okay. It might be helpful for me to put a 0 on the end of the number just so I can compare them more easily. So I have 850 on one side, 850 thousandths, and I have 875 thousandths. So this number is going to be bigger. We're going to skip ahead a little bit. Okay, so that is the strategy you want to use. You want to make them all the same. So you want to make them all decimals or all percents or all fractions so that you can compare them more easily. And I don't want to make this video too long, but you do have these got it problems on page 131 that you can try. Let's just look at maybe one or two. So in this example, H, we have a percent and we have a decimal. We can make them both into the same thing. So maybe we'll change them into percents or change them into decimals. Why don't I change 42% into a decimal? And then it is clear to me that 44 is bigger than 42. So this one is bigger. Let's look at I. 7% and 7/10. Well, I know percents are always out of 100, so I'm going to make them into fractions. This would be 7 out of 100. Okay, 7 pieces out of 100 is not going to be as much as 7/10, and I can show that by making this one into 100ths as well, by multiplying by 10. This would be 70 100ths. So I know that this one is going to be bigger. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. You are welcome to stop by Win if you have any questions.